Good evening and welcome to the 2018 ASUA EVP and AVP debate. This is a partnership between the Associated Students of the University of Arizona and the Arizona Student Media. My name is Marlon Freeman and I serve as the ASUA Elections Commissioner. So before we start, we'll be doing the EVP Q&A portion first. So I would like to introduce our panelists. First, we have our ASUA Executive Director of Marketing, Jacob Sickler. We have our ASUA Student Body Senator, Cris Reyes. We have our Executive Vice President, David McGarey. And then we have an ASUA Club Advocate, Cassandra Bade. Before we bring our candidate up, we'll lay down the specific rules we have. So each candidate will have initially 4 minutes to introduce themselves and speak about their platform. Please applause after both candidates have discussed their platforms. The way we'll work is that our panelists will ask our candidate a question, and then our candidate will have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our candidate for Executive Vice President, Matt Rain.
Let me know when you're ready, Marlon. Okay, so, yeah, okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank Marlon and our panelists here and Daily Wildcat for coming out. There that goes. Really is meaningful when, you guys know who I am. Really is meaningful that you're all out here today. You're all out here taking your time to ask questions about some really important topics. So thank you all very much. So just as an introduction, my name is Matt Rain. I'm currently a student body senator here at the University of Arizona. I'm a junior studying law and political science with a minor in environmental studies. In terms of my involvement as well here in the University of Arizona campus, I'm an Arizona ambassador, which means I give campus tours. I'm a member of Arizona Allegiance Honorary, and I've been involved in Students for Sustainability. I'm in the Honors College. I do a lot here on campus, certainly cover a lot of ground. So in terms of my platforms, really, first of all, clubs must know that ASUA is a resource for them. And I'm not talking just 100 clubs, not talking 200 clubs, I'm talking all 600 plus clubs must know that ASUA is there for them. And really, the targeted objective in that is that I really want clubs to have a friend in ASUA. Now, I know David and Cassandra and all of our other wonderful club ads have done an amazing job this year in really facilitating that relationship, but I think we can do better. We can push those boundaries. I really want to be proactive in terms of reaching out to clubs and making sure that they have a friend in ASUA. So we'll get into the specifics of that a little bit later, but really, the conclusion of that is that, whether you're in mock trial or Eller Hispanic Honorary or whatever club, you deserve to have the same access to ASUA club funding and access to ASUA. So my second platform is that, so now we're going into the third year of Senate representation, and for 2 years we've done a really nice job. We built relationships with our college-specific senators, but hopefully this year we will, not hopefully, we will have filled all of our Senate college seats. And so I really want to be there to help facilitate those relationships. So I think a huge part of facilitating those relationships is actually having the college-specific senators themselves look after and be sort of responsible for the communication between ASUA and their college's specific clubs. I think that is something that can work in conjunction with their CRC and Senate. But also encouraging them to hold office hours in their college, writing newsletters, having meetings with their dean. Any way I can assist them in that process, I will certainly do. And then lastly, certainly as a student, I'm very passionate about tuition and fees here at the University of Arizona. So I spoke in front of the Arizona Board of Regents. I have written letters. I've called my legislators. And I really want everyone, not only in this room, not only in ASUA, but really every single Wildcat to do that as well. And so how clubs sort of fits into that, we have 600 plus clubs here on campus, as I mentioned, and more than 20,000 students here at the U of A belong to those 600 plus clubs. So I think that connection between ASUA and those clubs and the general student body, we can utilize all of our resources to really push for the fight that I think we all agree on lowering tuition here and keeping no fee increases in place. So those are my platforms, and I certainly welcome any questions to follow.
Perfect. Thank you so much for giving us that insight into your platforms and kind of the campaign process so far. So the first question that I have is, there's a certain stigma surrounding the Club Resource Center that some club advocates are not always adding value during their time in the CRC. What will you do to ensure that the CRC is always striving to serve students?
Right. So I think a huge part of that is having club advocates on a semi-regular basis go and visit clubs. And certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe right now there's like a process for club advocates for visiting clubs. So I'd like to really be proactive in that. So keeping those folks on track. And then David, I think you've done a really good job this year of keeping track of their hours in office. And I think that's really important. But also having those hours count certainly towards visiting clubs, visiting, when we're on the mall or whatever the case may be. That's all part of the process of really, that sort of friendship that I want to form between club ads and ASUA. I think that'll be really meaningful.
Perfect, thank you. And then one other quick question. So in your bio, you do mention that you want to have a personal connection between those club ads and the 600 plus clubs. And just doing some real quick math, that comes out to be about 75 clubs per club ad. So how do you think it's going to be possible for that one club ad to have that responsibility, that one-on-one relationship? And do you think there may be an issue of, if that relationship, that club ad is not available, how to kind of distinguish those needs and kind of like delegate that to a new club ad?
Right, that's a great question. So ASUA, of course, is limited in the terms of resources that we have, but I believe that with a complete team effort, it's going to be possible. So I mentioned college-specific senators should be, and hopefully under an EVP reigned administration, will be sort of responsible for the clubs in their colleges. So that automatically reduces a lot of clubs that are there. Secondly, personally myself, the executive chief of staff, the deputy chief of staff will participate in that role. And I'd like to see really everyone in ASUA. Now, if someone is in ASUA and they're involved, they could even potentially hold the responsibility of being that club advocate, even without the title of being a club advocate. If I'm in mock trial, I'm really familiar with it, and I'm in ASUA, there you go. I'm an automatic club advocate. It's really meant to be for the clubs who don't have a friend in ASUA, who really don't know anyone, or just sort of new to the process, or just like, hey, there's money available, what? So that's why, yes.
Could you walk me through your understanding of the club registration process?
Sure. So as I understand it, clubs can go on the ASUA website, so clubs.arizona.edu, and then there are multiple forms for them to fill out. So first, you have to certainly get the name approved, et cetera. You have to get a advisor. So you have to find a professor or a staff member to sort of be your advisor. And then I know there are various other forms as well. I believe there's some sort of financial form. In terms of my actual knowledge, I will say it's relatively limited. And so for me, I'm really looking forward to, of course, working with the transition team and really cutting up and surrounding myself with people, former club ads, or club ads currently, who really know what they're doing and can walk me through this process. Being a senator, I've really just been exposed to that, but I'd really love to extend that into club ads. And additionally, I'd like to get current senators or next year's Senate class involved with the CRC as well, and really get them familiar with the club process. Like club ads, they have the ability to help folks around campus. I was talking about that team effort. I think it is really valuable for senators to sort of be aware of those processes. So, good question.
Okay, and a little bit of a follow-up. From what you do know about the registration process, what steps would you take to directly increase the ease of that registration process for clubs?
Sure. So I think the number one thing is, especially for, a lot of course, how a club comes about, a student has an idea. And a million students on this campus have an idea about creating a club, but a lot of times people don't exactly know how to follow through on that process. So making sure that that individual has a friend or someone in ASUA that they can immediately talk to and really guide them through that process. So I think a big part of that is expanding our outreach within clubs themselves. I think oftentimes a lot of a lot of folks who want to create clubs, they come from clubs themselves. Maybe they have another idea, whatever the case may be. Oh, hey, I want to be the president of this new club. So, just making sure clubs understand that process, I think will have a nice trickle-down effect in terms of that.
Tell me your understanding of the marketing department and what it functions as.
Sure. So from what I understand, the marketing department is there for clubs, really, and for ASUA as well. So if a club comes up to marketing and say, hey, I really need a design for a T-shirt or something like that, marketing will fulfill that obligation. And I know certainly with like elections, right? Election use marketing to create the logo that we have here, live in the tradition. So that was great. Marlon's nodding his head, but that was great. So that's primarily the function of marketing. But also I think in terms of collaborations with PR as well, I think is really important and something I'd like to see grow. It sort of feels like both PR and marketing do a lot of the same relative things, but I'd like to see that sort of collaboration happen between the two.
Hi, Matt.
Hey, Cris.
So Senate accountability has been an ongoing issue. What will you do differently this year to ensure that senators are held accountable?
Right. So this year what we've been doing, and EVP McGarey implemented sort of an online system in collaboration with our ASUA admin, where you sign in on this computer. It's in the CRC. And we've had like this paper thing for a while. We've had that for a couple of years. But the system really does need to be improved going into next year. So I think the computer idea was a good start, but I think you have to find a way so that students don't forget to sign out. And I know that's been a big issue as well. So I think that's the number one thing. We are having that computer system. First of all, find a way to put it in the Senate office. I know it's just it's silly to ask, or it's silly to just sort of they have to walk 5 feet. Shouldn't they just walk 5 feet? But I think that would be easier to have it in the actual office. And then second, having students actually report their hours. I think that's really important. There's not any sort of way, and then have either myself or the deputy chief of staff or the Senate president sort of look that over and just sort of to see. I think we, on one hand, we should trust senators to report their hours fairly, but if they're not, there has to be a serious conversation of, in terms of where are you? So certainly that's something I'd be looking forward to do.
Thank you. So I'll be asking questions on behalf of the UA Cultural and Resource Center since they didn't get to finish the questions during the town hall.
Sure.
So the first question is, we currently have Tucson community members and UA Native students leaders working to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous People Day at the university. As ASUA leaders, what are actionable steps that can be taken to support these students and their efforts?
Definitely. So that's a great question. Sorry they didn't ask that at the town hall. I think it's really, really, really important that we immediately change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. It's sort of astounding to me that it's still Columbus Day. So I think that it's really important that we as student leaders, first of all, recognize that, we pronounce that, we say, look, we wanted to change to Indigenous Peoples Day. I think one of the big things that ASUA can do, student body presidents, senators, really all of ASUA, is hold events in conjunction with Native American student groups, right? So whether that's their cultural center, whether that's clubs, whatever the case may be, I think really will build that relationship. And so when it is time, maybe next year when Indigenous Peoples Day comes around, we can hold a protest or a rally or an event on the mall, whatever that case may be, that says these students are not alone in their fight to change this ridiculous name to what it should be, which is Indigenous Peoples Day. So that was a good question.
Thank you. So just a real quick kind of background information for you. Club funding from the Dean of Students Office is guaranteed at $165,000. Anything on top of that is kind of coming out of ASUA or something like that. In your bio, you do mention $300,000 in club funding. Do you have any idea of what resources you're going to be able to leverage to get enough funding for the Appropriations Board?
Sure. So I think it's incredibly important that we make it known that there are 20,000 students who have the ability to access this club funding. So you have that base of 165. This year is 225. I'm not sure exactly what it was in years past, but I would like it to be $300,000 or more. I think when you look at various different sort of organizations here on campus that get funding. So I'm on the Green Fund currently, and we roughly have about $400,000 to spend money on sustainable projects here on campus. But really for us, we had like 30 proposals to spend that $400,000 on. And certainly affects a lot of students, and I'm really glad the work we're doing. But when you have 20,000 students, $160,000 between them is not enough. I think also the argument I'd make is that with this expanded outreach, with hopefully more than 200 to 250 clubs coming before our appropriations board, we have the ability to hopefully give out more money, right? And I think what I really want to make clear to those clubs is that they have the ability to go to ASUA and ask for money. Now, whether that's for t-shirts or pins or to go to a conference in New York, I think it's really important that they know that funding is available. So with increased funding, we'll be able to fund more amazing clubs that come before the appropriations board.
Perfect. And then one other question about appropriations.
Sure.
One of the issues we have currently is that after clubs receive funding, they may miss the deadline to return their receipts to get reimbursed, or they end up not sending the full amount if they get just general funding. How can the executive branch make sure clubs are fully taking advantage of the funding that they were allocated?
Right. So clubs are run by people and students. Students are busy. They forget. I totally understand, certainly when that happens, things cross your mind. And there are a lot of really technical financial forms that clubs have to fill out. So I think the first objective is to follow up. Hopefully with that team effort of having that friend at ASUA, that friend, whether that's a club ad or myself, or a senator, or really anyone at ASUA, they'll be able to follow up personally with that club and really remind them, hey, this is due, hey, spend your money, whatever the case may be. Now, of course, we're not looking to tell clubs exactly what to do and where to be, but it's just sort of a gentle, friendly reminder to really, hey, this form's due next Friday, just be aware. So I think having that personal connection is very important. Sometimes if you just send an email, people don't look at it again, students are busy, and that happens, but I think having that personal connection will improve that process.
Okay. With only 8 club advocates, you're asking them to take on 75 clubs.
Right.
How will you ensure that these clubs are evenly distributed so that high demand clubs do not fall on the back of only one club advocate?
Right. So as I mentioned, definitely involving those senators, I think, is really important. Now, I'm not sure. I'd have to do the breakdown of how many college-specific clubs there are, but I think that would take a huge burden off the back of the CRC. So I think that's number one. Number two, actually, can you repeat the question again? I totally lost my train of thought. What was it?
It's just how do you ensure that the high demand
Oh, right,
clubs
okay.
don't just fall on the back of one? Like, how will you distribute them?
Right. So I think so you'll have that personal connection. But I love what y'all did this year. What you implemented with the club email, the CRC specific email. I think any questions that get sent to that CRC specific email can be answered by any club ad. Right. You're not like solely responsible for that one club. That's your focus. Right. So if someone comes in, they're in whatever mock trial. Right. But you're not the club ad for that club. That's okay. That doesn't matter. You can still answer their questions in any sort of way. So I think sort of having that team effort is really important, and definitely making sure that there's that nice combination there of team effort and individual attention.
Okay, so as EVP, how would you assist or improve the marketing department?
Right. So I know certainly in conversations that I had or sort of I've seen, I think one of the issues right now is getting people who are technically skilled in marketing itself. So your graphic designers, your like Jake, you're an amazing photographer. Like getting folks who really have those amazing technical skills to join our marketing team, I think is very important. I think oftentimes a lot of our applicants come from certainly marketing backgrounds in Eller, and certainly we'd love to welcome those folks in. But getting people who are proficient in the Adobe suite and using that full partnership that we have with Adobe, that would be really amazing. So that's number one. I think number two is really hopefully improving the speed at which clubs get feedback, certainly on, and that's the problem too. There's so many limited resources within marketing, but finding a way to improve the speed of getting materials back to clubs, I think is really important. Because if we wait 3 weeks, 4 weeks to get back to a club, maybe they're like, ASUA kind of sucks at this, right? Like maybe I'll just make it myself or go elsewhere. We want them to use our resources. So getting back to them as fast as possible is certainly something I'd be looking to do.
Having to oversee 16 senators can at times be a lot of work. What will you do to ensure every senator is staying on track and receiving the support they need from yourself and the deputy?
Great question. This year, we implemented the one-on-ones, which I think have been really helpful. Now, I think maintaining and keeping up with those is really important. Certainly something that EVP McGarey has done or moving into the second semester, has done the paper fill-out, so we have on record something. I think on paper is great. I would like to see us try it on the computer and see how that goes. But I think that's really important, like making sure a senator is constantly in contact with not only myself, but the Deputy Chief of Staff, the Senate President, Senate leadership. I think that's really, really important. I think oftentimes as a senator, you kind of feel hopeless, right? You go into the year, you have these amazing ideas and things happen. Maybe it's already been done or administrators just don't answer your email. Whatever the case may be, I think it's always being there for senators to encourage them to find something new. I think additionally, as the executive vice president, I think you're also sort of executive chief motivator. You're really there for senators to motivate them. Opportunity that we could do, or hey, you know, there's a meeting going on with the union director, whatever the case may be. I think it's always finding those opportunities for senators. They should be self-motivated by themselves, but when they're not, I think it's a good idea to certainly motivate them.
Thank you. And our next question is, what do you think about inclusion and diversity in experiential learning programs like study abroad and alternative spring break? What do you hope to do to impact marginalized populations participating in experiential learning programs like these?
Definitely. Who's that question from, or was just?
I do not.
Okay, that's fine. No, that's a great question. I was just curious. I think that's a really, really great point. Whoever asked that question brought up a great point. I think part of the issue is study abroad, and then this is a national issue, and certainly at the U of A, but it's normally people of privilege, people who come from wealthier backgrounds who afford to go to Costa Rica or go to Spain, who go to wherever around the world, and I think that needs to be changed. We all deserve to have the opportunity and the access for these amazing programs, and I'm very familiar with the Study Abroad Office. I think they do amazing work. They help students find scholarships, etc. But really connecting them certainly with more scholarship opportunities, I think is something that's really important. So it's not just seen as something that privileged folks can do, but really from any corner of campus. So I think it's really important to make that clear. And I think in terms of alternative breaks, same sort of thing. I mean, these trips, while they're less expensive than study abroad, they can cost a decent amount of money. So I think, of course, not only just reaching out to our cultural centers, but making it clear that these programs are there for all students on campus and not just the privileged folks among us.
Thank you. So your second platform, you talked a lot about the college-specific senators and doing what you can to form those connections
Right.
in our college. However, as you know, the entire Senate does vote on topics that impact the entire student body. So how will you make sure those senators are balancing the needs of their college with the needs of the general population?
Right. So I think that's something that certainly, I think senators, college-specific senators, have done a good job of that this year. I know, all of our college-specific senators, Senator Strang and Melikar and Thompson, I think they've all done a wonderful job of balancing the needs of their college and the needs of the student body sort of at large. What I'd sort of recommend for them to do is sort of, when they're going into the year, sort of have maybe one immediate thing they want to do for their college, and one sort of general broad thing that they want to work on with the rest of Senate. I think always having sort of 2 or 3 sort of goals in mind to achieve, and making sure those goals are balanced, I think is really important for the individual senator to think about. And I'll challenge them to really vary themselves as well. So if someone is just super focused on their college, that's great, but I would encourage them to hop on board with another project that a senator is working on, or whatever the case may be.
Thank you. And then as you may have seen last night, a lot of the upcoming Senate candidates are platforms that involve something within our programs and services in ASUA. Mm-hmm. How will you work to bridge the gap between the executive and administrative branch and make sure to enable your senators to be successful?
Right. So I think immediately, I think it's really important that, we've had a lot of programs and services come to us in our Senate meetings, but I'd love to see senators go to those programs and services in their meetings. I think that's really important. It's great that we get a presentation. It's great that, we are able to fund money to some of these programs and services, but, going to their events, I think is really important. and certainly something that I encourage next year. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, whoever the administrative vice president ends up being, making sure that we're always in constant communication. If there's any problems with their administration, there or vice versa, making sure those communication lines are really open. I think it's really important. I know the executive team meetings, certainly look forward to continuing those as well, and just making sure that communication's there.
Okay, and many colleges have a well-established internal club structure, for example, the Engineering Student Council and the Federation of Eller Student Organization. Have you put in any thought of how to work with these organizations to best serve clubs?
Right, so certainly these organized clubs that are already there, they already know what they're doing. They have done it before, they have presidents and they have 70 people on their e-board, whatever the case may be, and so they know what they're doing. But I think, first of all, it's just making sure that they don't feel like they're out on an island. I think sometimes these clubs sort of recede back into their own little thing that they operate in, and that's all they want to do and whatever. But just making sure, regardless of how big the club is, whether that's Engineering Student Council or any clubs in Eller, that we are there for them as a resource, regardless of whether they need that resource or not. Like, you can lead a horse to water, can't make them drink. Same sort of situation applies, right? So if we can show them that we are there for them, we go to their meetings, and really, if they don't want to be involved with us, that's okay. But just making sure that they know that we're there.
So right now the marketing department has 7 members in it. Do you think it would function better if it had fewer or more members?
I think that's a difficult question. So on one hand, you want to keep it compact. You want to be able to manage those folks who are in the department. I think on the other hand, it's really beneficial to have more folks working on things that clubs need, right? I mean, you have 600 plus clubs, as I mentioned, and sometimes it's really hard to get a club a logo within a week or two, or whatever the case may be, on top of trying to get things for ASUA as well. And making a logo or whatever sort of marketing, that takes time. So I would advocate at this point including more members. I know it's a little bit harder to manage, but I'm of the belief that the more the merrier in this instance, even if it is a little bit harder to manage, just to reduce the burden on some of the folks currently in marketing.
In your platform, you mentioned advocates. In your opinion, what is the best way for the EVP to get involved with advocates?
Sure. So I think immediately it's connecting those clubs with advocates so for those of you in the room who don't know, or for those of you who are watching this at a later point on video, advocates is within our policy department in ASUA to lobby on behalf of the University of Arizona and students to the Arizona State Legislature. So I know that's coming up in a few weeks. So in terms of getting clubs involved, I think a huge portion of that will certainly happen through our friends of the clubs or club advocates and myself in terms of that personal connection. I think that's really important. So instead of just email blasting is great. We can say, hey, sign up for this, sign up for this, sign up for that. I think having that personal connection is really important in sort of facilitating that. And really, let's say, I go to a club and, I think, our advocates membership has certainly grown some more, but I want to see 1,000 plus students in advocates, right? I think right now we have less than 100. I want to see 1,000. I want to see 2,000. Never stop, never settle, right? So that's the goal.
Awesome, thank you. And our next question is, what do you think is the most major obstacle in obtaining equity on our campus, and how would you address it?
Good question. So I think that's a very deep question. I think the work of individuals to recognize their privilege falls upon themselves. Certainly ASUA has a role in doing so, but as individuals, all of us within student government and around campus, we have to certainly recognize our own privilege before any change can actually happen. Secondly, I think following those lists of demands for sure continues, that needs to continue to be done. I think the work that has been accomplished so far has been amazing. I think President Lubicic has done a great job within ASUA, but making sure that not only all of us sort of understand the needs and wants of the cultural centers, but are willing to stand up for them and sort of fight for them and for what they believe in. I think first step is listening. Second step is standing in solidarity with those folks who do not come from privileged backgrounds. And then lastly, I think certainly hiring in terms of institutionally and administrationally, hiring folks of color. I think when you go into a classroom and certainly you see someone who is represented, and it's really powerful. So pushing administration to do that, I think, is very important.
Thank you. And I know we've been here a while. Don't worry, you got one more round, and then we're about done. So.
Sorry,
Awesome.
I told you to grill me. So.
All right, so one of the big issues we hear about is the availability of the senators for the student body to directly engage with.
Right.
How are you going to make sure that the entire student body has access to their voices or representatives?
Right. So I think the issue right now, and certainly as I see it, is that Senate, as much as we like to say, hey, we're always here for students to listen, we should be actively engaged in going to listen to clubs, to organizations, to cultural centers. I think right now we have these office hours. We're just we sort of say, hey, we're here, come and see us. Now, whether that message gets across or not, and I think that's a good first step. But I think actively engaging and going to programs and services and going to cultural centers and going to club meetings, I think is very important for senators to do. So I think that's really a huge reason why that could be the case. Yes, that ended there. All right.
Thank you. One of the key roles you will have as the executive vice president is representing ASUA, whether that's sitting on a panel, talking with administration, alongside your AVP and president. How will you work with those elected AVP and president to make sure ASUA is having a uniform front and really representing the best interests of the student body?
Right. So first of all, I think it's making sure, so first of all, it's that communication part that I talked about, having those weekly meetings, but more importantly, that we're all on the same page in terms of what our unified message is going to be. I think as ASUA leaders, we have to be vocal. We have to be out there actually in the community fighting for things that we collectively believe in as a student organization. If we sort of just sit there and send out emails and just sort of, regardless of what we believe, if we're not saying it sort of loud and proud as a unified front, then it really doesn't matter what we say. So I think that's the first thing. So no matter who is elected president here, no matter who is elected administrative vice president, really be looking forward to working with whoever on collectively voicing our opinion on every single issue that is important, whether that's DACA, whether that's non-lethal weapons on campus, whatever the case may be. I think we all need to consistently and strongly advocate for issues here on campus.
In your own words, can you describe to me how the appropriations process works?
Right. So a club, again, they fill out a form within that they go on, clubs.arizona.edu. There's an appropriations form they fill out. They say what club they're from, et cetera, what they're requesting the club monies from or for. So let's say they want T-shirts or they want to go to a conference, whatever the case may be. So they type it out, fill it on there. It gets sent to our appropriations board, who I believe there's 5 of them, 5 or 6, and it's chaired by a Senate member. And then they go before the board on an agenda item, and their funding gets approved or not approved. So I know, it's ranged from clubs have asked for a couple $100 to $6,000, $8,000. So that process certainly is a lot. But again, I don't know everything about the appropriations process, which is why I'll be looking forward to working with the transition team and sort of learning everything that there needs to be learned about that process.
Yes, and then with your knowledge, what are some ways in which you plan on improving the way appropriation meetings are held and the way that the funds are distributed?
Right, so I think actually this year we've done a much better job of ensuring that all funds stay till the end of the year. I know we had that problem a couple of years ago with funds running out, so we've definitely done a better job of that. So I think one, it's making sure the chair of the meeting, so that senator of it in terms of club funding and making sure that we're on track for the year. And then secondly, I think it's really, again, making sure that all clubs are aware that this club funding is available. Someone who was a club ad and has been involved in the appropriations process, this individual told me that really she thinks that only 200, 250 clubs come before appropriations. I really want to boost that number by 100 to 150. I really think that's possible, so definitely that.
Okay, do you think it makes sense to combine the PR and marketing department?
No, I think they're two separate entities. I think PR is public relations, obviously that's what it stands for, but I think PR is really supposed to be the sort of connection between the community at large and ASUA. I know our PR department does an amazing job at that, but I think marketing is really more so focused on connections with clubs specifically. I think that's a big difference too. Clubs specifically and ASUA in general. So I think the two are very distinct roles. As I said, I would like them to hopefully collaborate, but I think they should still be separate.
I can see how passionate you are about advocates. How will you manage being involved with advocates and lobbying at the Capitol, yet at the same time fulfilling your EVP duties?
Sure. So tuition and fees, fruition and bees, has always been something that I've been really passionate about throughout my entire life, and that will never ever change, regardless of whether I go on to be President of the United States or a teacher or a lawyer, whatever the case may be, I'll always be very passionate about that. So I think my role as Executive Vice President is going to be engaging clubs in that effort. So that will be sort of my role and sort of the way that I see that I will advocate on behalf of students. Certainly I will continue to lobby for students and engage in the fight for lower tuition and limited fees, but I think my role is certainly in engaging clubs, and that's how I would accomplish that.
Awesome, thank you. And this will be our final question. Just kidding, it'll be our second to last question. We are embarking on becoming a Hispanic serving institution. What opportunities do you see taking place, and how might ASUA contribute to one of them?
Yes, so I believe the threshold is 25% of the student body to become a Hispanic serving institution. I think we need to get there. We're almost there. I believe we're at like 20% or so. So making sure that that happens is certainly a priority. In terms of my role in executing that goal is certainly, I think, as a student, I would say it really is about retention, right? So excuse me, making sure we retain all students across campus, but certainly students of color. And I think, you know, as I mentioned earlier, Eller Hispanic Honor Society, I think that's an amazing club. And, you know, again, if you find folks here on campus that you can relate to in your own background, I think that's really instrumental in keeping you here at the University of Arizona. So making sure those clubs and any sort of cultural clubs here on campus and Hispanic clubs, they have all the resources that they need. And I think within those clubs in particular, a lot of those folks, they have friends that they went to high school with, and they can say, hey, I love the U of A, I love my club, come on down. And I think that will help us push us above that 25% threshold.
Perfect. And then your last bonus question.
All right.
So as the university continues to grow, it's going to continue to need more funds, even if we're just looking at operations alone.
Sure.
If the admin looks to students to get those funds from tuition or fees, how capable are you in highlighting the other sources the university can leverage to be able to continue to grow and serve its students?
Sure. Are you asking like what I would do like in terms of my own advocacy to?
So like, as you know, I was like allowed to sit in on the tuition and
Right.
fees conversation. So if they look to you in that role next year, how are you going to be able to have that conversation to say, hey, listen, these are your other ways. This is how we should approach the problem.
Right. So I think one of the biggest things is always being engaged, always being vocal. I think it's great to be able to sit on those meetings for sure. But I think as a student leader, you should be consistently challenging administration. And the conversation shouldn't just be happening in the tuition setting process. It should be happening year round, in the summer, in spring, fall, all the seasons. Certainly that's a big deal. Secondly, I think it's making sure that you have that relationship with administrators to be able to have that dialogue and discussion with them. If I'm walking to that room not having met anyone, do they really care about my opinion? I mean, maybe they do because I'm a student, that's great. But I think, making sure you have that connection with administrators so they take you seriously. And that goes for the president, that goes for the administrative vice president, that goes for all members of ASUA. So certainly, it's a good question. And obviously, as executive vice president, I will do everything in my power to help reduce tuition fees, regardless of how insurmountable that task seems to be at times. Always have hope.
All right, thank you. Let's give a round of applause to our EVP candidate. And definitely, I'd like to thank our panelists, definitely Cassandra Bade for a club advocate. I think her voice and her opinion really does matter. It's a really big part of the EVP that no one really knows, so please give her a round of applause as well. And then I'd like to thank Jacob for coming around. Marketing is, a lot of people don't know marketing is in the executive branch, so having him here really does show the support that he has for our next EVP, so thank you. And thank you to our senator for coming here. We really need his perspective on who or what he thinks that the EVP should do to support people in his position next year, so thank you. And then lastly, and the biggest round of applause, I think, we have our Executive Vice President, David. He's been here 2 nights in a row, asking questions, hard-hitting, making sure, you know, all our candidates are thinking, are on their toes. So give another round of applause.
And definitely give a round of applause to Marlon, who has also been here both nights and is always working to make sure that this process is running smoothly and doing everything he can.